founder and president, Wako Canada president, and 5-time world middleweight kickboxing champion. Hi, Maz. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing awesome, Stephanie. It's an honor to be here.
So glad to have you. So let's jump off, and you can tell us a little bit about how you got started in the world of kickboxing.
Ooh, that's a huge question. I will maybe start off way back. I mean, I started off in the martial arts at the tender and chubby age of 7. And I basically started martial arts because we lived in an area where there was a lot of bullying, there was a lot of racism. And my older sister, Zarka, used to have to protect me when, bullies were bothering me. And my parents, who came from a fairly traditional culture, used to say that, it was the responsibility of the boy to protect the girl. I know you completely don't agree with that. And in the end, they put me into karate so that I could actually do something. The sad part about that is it never worked for a number of years. And my sister continued to beat up bullies while I continued to cower beneath her legs. And one thing led to another. And then eventually I got into boxing, kickboxing, and life went on.
Amazing. So exciting. Maz, you're an extremely busy man. You own Bay Area Athletic Club. You coach professionals. You coach amateur fighters. What made you want to produce Cask? What makes you keep putting your time and your energy into Cask? And tell us a little bit about what Cask is.
Okay. So going back again, I mean, when I was first introduced to kickboxing, the sport itself was not at the amateur level legal in Ontario. It wasn't legal in most of the provinces. This is going right back to the 80s. And even though kickboxing was huge in the US and it was growing in Europe, there was really little opportunity for athletes to compete here. So at the time I was working with the International Red Cross and I got a posting in Europe. So I moved to Switzerland and lived there for a number of years and then got totally immersed into kickboxing there. So in Switzerland, I could fight every weekend and literally I did. So I worked for the International Red Cross during the week. Saturday I donned my Superman cape and jetted off to another country, did a fight, did a tournament, loved it completely. And then when I came back to Canada, I felt like I was back in the dark ages. Fights were being held, underground. Nothing was legal, nothing was organized. And so I took my experience with the Red Cross and working with NGOs to find a way of determining why kickboxing wasn't approved or legal, or whatever the terminology was in every different province. And we worked towards getting something recognized. I think for myself, I had turned pro when I was in Europe too, and I really wanted to look at the possibility of amateur athletes not having to do what I did, which was go to another province, go to another country. And that really was my priority. I mean, I was still fighting. At this point, it was easier for me because I had promoters that wanted me to fight in Europe or Africa or Asia, but there was nothing, I could do at home. So that was the first beginnings of why we started Cask, which now is called Wako Canada. But there was a lot of legwork that needed to be done. We needed to develop coaching courses. We needed to get insurance. We needed to get recognition from provincial governments. We had to develop a risk management program. We had to find out how to certify officials and put them on a database. We need to look at injury management and tracking athletes' health and safety. So it was a huge project. I had some good friends in the US that were helping me. And we basically created the organization in New York State because kickboxing was legal there. And we built it there over a number of years. And then we brought it to Ontario, got Ontario recognized as the very first province to have amateur kickboxing as a recognized sport. And the coolest thing is the second province we got to be recognized was Newfoundland, your hometown. And that was the second area of getting an actual government recognized sport. And I want for your listeners that maybe come from other sports, this may seem a little odd because, if you play soccer or football, there's no issue because you have, Soccer Ontario or Soccer Newfoundland or Hockey Canada or Hockey Newfoundland. Because kickboxing is a combative sport, there's a lot of legislation that did not allow for it. So we had to find a way of maneuvering through the legislation and then showing governments that we actually could organize a safe, viable, risk mitigated sport at the amateur level. So it took a lot of policy writing, it took a lot of lobbying. We got Ontario, then we got Newfoundland, then we got PEI, and then we started working on other provinces. And that was the reason why. So really, for me, at the end of the day, boiled down to I had a difficult, growth in the sport, and often I tell my athletes that I lost my first 10 fights. I actually got stopped in my first 5, either because I got knocked out or referees mercifully decided to end the bout, and it was because there was no regulatory requirements. I was fighting on underground shows. I was going to the US where you're never the favorite. And I really wanted to, in my heart of hearts, have a system and a program where any athlete, whether you're the age of 10 or 50, that wanted to compete, wanted to enjoy a passion that you had, to do it in a safe, mitigated way, but also be part of a global structure, which now has become extremely popular internationally with leagues like Glory and One, the K1 regulatory body. There's so many large institutions for amateur and professional kickboxing, and we really wanted to have Canada on the map as well, and that was really it.
Amazing. I know there's a lot of definitely grateful amateur kickboxers in Newfoundland who are happy that you could pioneer that for us. I mean, when someone else paves the way, it makes everyone else's way a little bit easier. Tell us a little bit about what Wako Canada, formerly CASK's program and services provide. I know you guys have done some amazing things like leadership programs, some coaching courses. What other kind of things are you putting out, and why should people avail of those?
Well, really, I think the challenge with our industry, it doesn't have to be kickboxing, it could be martial arts in general, or Muay Thai or MMA. I mean, there's never been a homegrown Canadian structure that really puts the athlete and sport development as its number one priority. So we want to see the sport grow. We want to see opportunities for athletes to be available, whether you just want to do the weekend tournament for fun, or you want to try and go as far as you can as an amateur and possibly turn professional at some point in your life. And really, the foundation of that is the club. So what we found was most clubs that teach kickboxing are former martial arts clubs. They did karate or taekwondo. They watched a couple of YouTube videos. Now they're teaching kickboxing, or they have come from a variety of different places. And what we wanted to do was to say, okay, we have to have some standards. We have to have coaching standards. We have to have standards for technical performance, and not necessarily be as stringent as Russia. So in Russia, they have one way of doing kickboxing. Everybody does it, whether you like it or not. Whatever club you come from, that's the system that you follow. There's definitely advantages to that. And I think for a lot of sports, like hockey, for example, there are standards. People teach hockey a certain way at the age of 5, 6, 7, from the peewees up to more, semi-pro and pro. So we never had anything like that. There was so much diversity out there. And I'm a big fan of diversity because I don't believe there's only one way of teaching kickboxing. I love the fact that the club that you come from, very much of a martial arts club, and you guys have athletes that have great kicking skills. And that came from your instructor and their background. And that was a style that worked really well and was taught a certain way. Other clubs have more of a hand background, a boxing background, so their athletes tend to do that. So what we've been working on, especially over the last 5 or 6 years, is coming out with a standard curriculum that we want to provide all clubs. And as a side note, we've had this for a number of years. We're relaunching it now. It's going to be referred to as the Wako Canada curriculum. So any martial arts club that wants to access it, it'll be made available through videos and documentation. So at least there is some standards that clubs can use when they're preparing their students for either recreational learning or for competition. That's a big thing for us. The other thing that I think is probably the greatest benefit of something like Wako Canada is that the reality in most sports, especially our sport, is how do you become a coach? Really. And for the most part, people become coaches by being former athletes, doing really well, and then deciding they wanted to coach, or being athletes, getting too old or getting injured, and then having to coach. Some athletes, they just develop a real passion for it, and then that's what they want to do. But the question is, how do you become a coach, and how do you become proficient at coaching? So we have our level 1 coaching course, which is like a standard. Here's ground zero skills that you need to know to become an effective coach. We don't care whether how you punch, how you kick, how you train. The idea is that that's a given. You know how to do this. But
Mhm.
what's the framework that you use? How do you plan with your athletes? How do you focus on, excellence in teaching? How do you focus on the development of skill progressions? How do you go from one skill to another? So our level 1 coaching course, I think, is an amazing opportunity for not just instructors and coaches at the club level, but athletes and parents also take to get a good grounding in how the sport should work. We're launching another project that will be released hopefully the end of this year, and it's the In the Zone course, and it's a course solely focused on sports psychology, because we determined that that was a huge need in our industry, that we as coaches and even as an athlete, we can all
Mhm.
pinpoint times where we just didn't get up in the morning to go for that run. We can pinpoint times where we showed up at a competition and we were flat, or we just didn't have it.
Mhm.
Well, I've never believed that. Like, I've always believed there's a reason behind why athletes, what I consider to be the term, underperform. Why do we underperform? And what are all the layers it takes to recognize? And there's so many of them. When I did my level 5 Olympic coaching certification with Sport Canada. And we were working with biomechanic experts. We were working with sports psychologists. We were working with people that looked at long-term athlete development. Like, how do you take an athlete at the age of 5 and get them ready for the Olympics, right? It's like that 10,000 hour rule, that it takes 10,000 hours to develop mastery of a skill. Well, that mastery is not just punching and kicking and strategy, but it's how do you journal write? How do you do affirmations? How do you center? How do you block out distractions? How do you get your butt out of bed in the morning at 5 and go for a run? Like, how do you manage your weight? Not from the mechanics of doing it, but from the mindset.
Mhm.
So this is a new project for us. We're launching it this year. And whether you want to be a high performance athlete, or you just want to get your 12-year-old daughter to come to classes and focus on her physical literacy and her motor skills. That's going to be a new project that we're launching. And when I look at the curriculum, or the In the Zone program, these are all coming out of an organization that focuses itself on athlete and sport development. And I think that's probably been the greatest benefit of an organization like Wako Canada.
So I myself got a chance to do the level 1 coaching course, and I can say, like, for anyone tuning in who is an athlete, who has a child in the sport, or who is a coach, that's definitely something that you should avail of. It talks a lot about safety, things like return to play, which I think is really neglected in this sport. You really get into detail about when someone should come back after a concussion, how they should come back after a concussion. That on top of sport etiquette, ring etiquette, that so many great valuable lessons that I definitely advise for people to jump on board. Sign me up for this upcoming sports psychology one, because I think that's going to be a great course as well. I know you've got to work with a lot of experts in the field. You work with Peter Jensen, which is an Olympic sports psychologist, right?
Yeah, viewers and
So
yes.
So I think it's great that you're taking what you've learned and you're passing it on to everyone in Canada who can avail of that, and should avail of that. So I think that's great. I want to get into some fun stories now. So, as head coach of the Canadian national team, you've gotten to travel all around the world, taking athletes, hundreds of athletes, to a lot of different countries. So, I want you to tell us a couple of your highlights, some of your most memorable moments from some of those trips.
Oh boy, God, there's so
I know it's a hard one. I'm putting you on a spot now. I'm sure
many.
there's tons and it's hard to narrow it down. And you're pretty old, so remembering all those trips years and years ago might be difficult for you.
Um, well, memorable stories. You know what? The greatest thing about going to a world championships is you get to go to a country where there's athletes from 50, 60, 70 different countries. People speak different languages. People use different deodorants or lack thereof. It's such a diverse environment, and but we have one common language, and that's the common language of kickboxing. And you know, for me personally, I could spend, and usually our world championships are like 7 days long. I could sit there for 7 straight days in the audience and just watch, watch bouts, take notes, think, see, innovative athletes, innovative, bouts or exciting bouts, and 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 that would be the greatest holiday for me. Like I would, and I know Stephanie, you've been to a few international events, and your days sometimes start at 6 in the morning and they finish at midnight, and you're literally between your hotel and the auditorium, and that's it. Then the last day you have a day off. But I could do that forever, and I have such a great time doing that. Um, and the great and part of that to me too is then having a group of Canadians, some of which that have never traveled internationally for a tournament, or even never traveled internationally in this kind of environment. Like we used to take teams to South Africa, and um, I know you attended. Did you go to one South Africa trip or two?
Two.
You went to two. Okay,
Had
yeah.
to go back another time. I enjoyed myself so much.
Yeah. I mean, the South Africa trips were incredible because, I mean, they made it a little bit easier because obviously they speak English there, which is always a challenge when you're traveling internationally. Um, but definitely, I think some of the challenges that I've experienced have been athletes that just, they get there and they don't know how to handle the difference. Like they don't know how to handle like buffets. Like I have so many stories of Canadians getting to a world championship event and then they realize, oh my God, all the food is free. Well, it's not free, you paid for it, but it's a giant buffet. And I had one athlete that I don't know why he didn't know this. I mean, he should have known this. And he, after they made weight, went to the buffet again and again and then again and gained virtually 20 pounds in a day. And then, I wasn't at the first meal because I was at an international meeting. And when I came back and made the announcement, okay, these are the athletes that are competing tomorrow. These are the ones that are not, but you're going to have to go in tomorrow, weigh in again. This young man raised up his hand and said, I have to weigh in again. I'm like, well, yeah, you have to weigh in every single day that you compete. Well, we put him on a trial scale and discovered that he had gained 20 pounds because he had gotten literally 10 heapings of supper. And this poor guy had to basically sweat off the entire night to try and even make weight. And those are the lessons of people that have never had to deal with the world championships and the stresses that come with it. Um, but honestly, I don't have a lot of like tragic stories, although we have had some athletes that discovered that, finding somebody, that they were looking to hook up with was not the best environment to do that internationally because it's just a different environment. This is not where you don't go there to do that by any means. So we'll keep those stories on the adult version of this show.
Or the couple of athletes that never made it on the flight back to Canada.
But honestly, like for me, I have more just lovely stories of talking to athletes and getting to know them. And I mean, I could do this for the rest of my life. People always ask me, you've been to, like, I competed at 12 world championships myself, and I've coached probably at more than 20. And they ask me if I ever get tired or want to pack in. I'm like, I could do this forever. Retirement is not a concept, and it's not a term in my language because I just enjoy being at a Worlds. And like one of my best experiences, honestly, was when we were in Turkey, and when you and Brandon had finished. I said, listen, if you guys really want to make this a priority, get up and meet me outside at 5 o'clock in the morning, and we'll go for a run. Because planning for your next role starts before this one ends, and just getting up in the morning with the two of you and just going for a run, and then talking about why that mindset, this idea that winning or performance is so much, it starts here and here, but it's then got to be translated into your actions. And for some athletes, they believe they can do it, in their heart, they believe they can do it, but that's never translated into actions. And I used to have a tradition when I was fighting as an amateur and especially as a pro that win or lose, I'd wake up the next morning and I'd go for a run because I knew in my mind I had to prepare for the next opponent, and it was a tradition. So if I won the bout, I ran 5K. If I lost the bout, I ran 10K, and it was just it's something that was like built into my system. And when I get a chance to share that with an athlete and say, it's not the idea of getting up and going for a run that's important. The idea is
Mhm.
building a habit, and that habit should eventually change the way you think, the way you feel, and change your perspective on everything. I mean, if you want a good relationship, then the habits that you have is asking your partner every day, how are they doing? If you fail, if you forget that over a period of days, weeks, months, when the relationship falls apart, and you wonder why, well, the question is you never built a habit based on something that was so fundamental to you. We have the same position in sport. I mean, if you want to be a champion, it's based on being habitual. So for me, the idea of hanging out with athletes and sharing, and I learned so much. Honestly, Steph, I can tell you that at every world championships I've been to, I bring a journal with me. And I write down things that I learned from chatting with athletes, listening to them um, before or after they've won bouts or lost bouts, and just trying to find out what is it that I can do as a coach to be better at my role. So I am extremely selfish, and that's why I usually, even though I select national team coaches to travel with teams and coach athletes, I insist on always coming because I need to get more ideas, more thoughts, and it's always inspiring to me. It's inspiring to me to be with a group of young people who kind of bring me back to the years I was fighting. And my day was totally different because in my day, most Canadian athletes that wanted to fight at world championships were more concerned about the after party than they were about the actual tournament. And so when everybody was eliminated, I was still in the stadium watching fights while the rest of them were out, cruising downtown, wherever, Munich, London, Germany. But I just wanted to absorb. So I knew when I took over, Wako Canada and the national team, I wanted to inculcate a culture of wanting to win. And even though we have a long way to go, because the reality is we don't have as much competitions as the Europeans do. We don't have as much opportunities as other countries do. But to me, that doesn't matter. To me, it's a matter of how do we get ourselves to a point where we're producing top end athletes, and that's become an obsession of mine.
And the people and the fighters of Canada are definitely benefiting from your obsession mess. That's for sure. Um, you give me goosebumps every single time you talk. But speaking of like determination and facing obstacles and stuff, in your career, you've had like three major setbacks. You had an injury to your shoulder, you had an injury to your ankle, and then you got diagnosed with a very rare kidney disease. Can you talk to us a little bit about those setbacks and how you found your way through all that and kept fighting and um, ended up becoming a five-time professional middleweight world champion?
Oh, sure, I will. Well, I always like to start that off by saying to people, um, I don't ever profess to be the best fighter in the world. I think when you say world champion or five-time world champion, I mean, everyone has this, ooh. I actually think I sucked. I really, and when I watch videos of myself, I'm like, like it grosses me out half the time. I love watching my athletes compete. And when I look at any one of the athletes I've worked with over the years, either at my own gym or on the national team, or, I think that the sports evolved so much that, I sort of look like a relic or a dinosaur. And even during my era, I don't think I was, the best fighter out there. But I had one thing going for me. Um, Jamie likes to call it OCD. I like to call it relation. I would always outwork everybody. I wasn't as strong or as flexible or as, you know, gifted biomechanically or proprioception. I was kind of a bit of a dork. Um, but I outworked everybody, and that was always my greatest strength. And so, and it started off at a really young age. So, when I started martial arts, I mentioned earlier, it was because of a racism challenge, and then when I finally started getting good at it, I started karate first, so we're really into kicking, and then I had a severe, knee injury. And that was from a dumb dare that somebody, dared me to do a marathon. And for all the listeners out there, it's really important. If you ever choose to do a marathon, you really need to run the distance. My meager 7K runs are not the way you train for marathon. You need to run the 21 miles repeatedly. I didn't, so I suffered a knee injury and had major surgery, and they removed my lateral meniscus. And so my biggest strength at the time was kicking. I couldn't kick anymore. And so I had to learn how to box. And even though I sparred once in a while at boxing gyms, um, one thing I know about the world of boxing is that at least the martial arts were kind of nice to each other. Boxing is not so much. They just beat the shit out of you. And so that was my experience of going to boxing gyms. But I just was determined. I'm like, listen, I can't kick anymore. I've got to figure out this boxing thing. And I just kept going and going and going. I hired a couple of really well-renowned boxing coaches. Chris Johnson, who is an Olympic medalist and an NABF champion. Dwight Fraser, who is also an Olympic boxer and trained a number of pros, whose son is going to be going to Olympics in Japan. And I worked with those two, but I went from gym I went to every gym, New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Detroit, got the crap beat out of me everywhere I went. But every time I go to a gym, a boxing gym, and spar with somebody, I'd say, listen, you beat the crap out of me for 5 rounds. Next time I come back, I want at least 1 round where I feel like I'm doing well. And I keep going and keep going and keep going. And I think it was the knee injury that was the greatest impetus for me to actually become better at boxing. Then I dislocated my shoulder. And again, super stupid dare. Somebody was really into
What? Another dare?
Another dare.
Oh, God.
Lifting weights, and I entered a powerlifting competition just because.
Oh, my.
I don't know. I was watching too many Arnold Schwarzenegger movies. Anyways, ripped out my rotator cuff, huge surgery, got it repaired, didn't do the physiotherapy on it, re-injured again, second surgery, had a fight coming up. I thought I could do it, re-injured again, third surgery. And then the doctors basically told me, listen, you got no more labrum left and you have no more shoulder, so you can't box anymore. But there was one surgeon that said, if you just didn't use that arm, you'd probably be okay. And I thought, okay, well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to become a southpaw and learn to fight the other way. And if I can do that, then I won't leave my elbow from my side, and I could probably still do it. The doctor said, well, that makes perfect sense. I think you're crazy, but that would probably work. And I spent a year just working on converting myself to a southpaw. And it was a painful year because I kept fighting and losing, fighting and losing. And then a year later, something snapped and I became a southpaw. And so I think those two experiences were probably the most, they were so valuable for me, because after those two, that's when I fought for the North American title down in New York, and I won, and I came back experiencing a lot of back pains. Ended up going to the hospital, and within 2 or 3 days, I was admitted, and I was on a respirator and a kidney dialysis unit because my left kidney stopped functioning. And it took them weeks and weeks of chemotherapy and prednisone injections. And then finally things subsided, and then they discovered I have a really rare kidney condition called Goodpasture syndrome. It's kind of a crossover between AIDS and cancer. So it's not AIDS, but because it's genetic, but it's an autoimmune disorder. But the only way you can treat it is through chemotherapy. And so I had massive chemotherapy for a few weeks, and I ballooned up to 210 pounds because my body was just absorbing all the IV. And when I finally got out and it went into remission, I called up a promoter in Croatia, set a date for a fight. It was, I think, in 6 months or 7 months, and just spent the next 6 months training to get back into shape again. And I think it was because of the knee and the shoulder that I knew if I put my mind to doing something, eventually I would do it. And as a side note, I went to Croatia, I got the crap beat out of me. So I probably needed a few more months, but that kind of set the tone for the rest of my career.
It's a good thing you're as tough as you are. But resilient too. And I didn't hear that last part. What was that?
I said OCD.
So there's been some exciting news in the world of kickboxing. We just received the news that the sport will be a part of the Olympic Games. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Well, just to clarify, it's not the Olympic Games; it's the European Olympic Games. So there are, so the way the world the world of the Olympic movement works, there are a number of pinnacle events that are part of the IOC movement. Obviously, the biggest event in the IOC is the Olympic Games, held every 4 years. And then there's a
Yep.
number of events that are like leading up to the Olympics. So the Pan Am Games is a big one for the North Americans because we know that's a stepping stone to get the Olympics. You have the Commonwealth Games, you have the World Games, you have the Asian Olympic Games, you have the European Olympic Games. So these are all like major. The Olympic Games every 4 years. So if you can imagine an athlete that's training for the Olympics, I mean, it's hard to train for 4 years. So they have these pinnacle events. So the European Olympics are held every 2 years. The Asian Olympic Games are held every 2 years. The Pan Am Games are, I believe, are held every 4 years in the off years of the Olympics. So what major sports do is they track your 4 year cycle. So everyone trains in 4 year cycles. So, in year one, you may do the Pan Am Games. In year two, you may do the Commonwealth Games. In year three, you may do the World Championships. Year four is the Olympics. And so to get a sport into the Olympic Games, you have to first become a member of the IOC, and that happened with Wako a few years ago, and it was a huge accomplishment because the IOC only takes in a small number of sports every few years. So they accepted kickboxing as one of the WACO as the organization to represent the sport in the Olympic Games, in the Olympics, in the IOC. And then we'd already been accepted in the Asian Games, which was amazing. A few years back, we got accepted to the World Games, which is another big IOC event. These are all sponsored events by the IOC. The largest event prior to the Olympics is actually the European Olympics, because there's obviously a lot of countries in Europe, and now we're in those games. So these are all huge pinnacle steps of finally getting kickboxing into the Olympics. I know when I was a young athlete, centuries ago, it was always, wow, one day we'll get in the Olympics, one day we'll get in the Olympics. And everybody touted, this is way before Wako and way before, things were moving the way they are now. And after a number of years, I just turned pro saying, well, that's never going to happen. So let me just make some money and be a professional athlete. Now it's exciting now because I know in my heart of hearts and from all the research that we've been doing, that we are probably 2 or 3 cycles away, which may sound like not a long time. Still is, like 4 years is a cycle. So 4, 8, or 12 years. But if you can imagine now, within 4, 8, or 12 years, some of us may still be competing. Not me, but some of us will still be competing, hopefully you, or some of us will be coaching. And so we have the chance, in our industry, in our sport, to actually train a young athlete to one day in 2024 or 2028 or 2032 to have an athlete from our hometown, from our club, actually represent Canada at the Olympic Games, the very first kickboxing, in the Olympics. And I know this sounds, sort of cloud in the sky, but I remember when women's boxing was accepted into the Olympics, and that was only like 2 cycles ago. And I remember, I had an athlete from my gym that was on the short list to go to the Olympics, and it was such an exciting time. And I kept thinking, wow, what? I have an athlete that could actually represent Canada at the Olympic Games from my club in Burlington, Ontario. Unfortunately, she got injured and she didn't go, but that's another story. She's gone on to do some pretty amazing things. So when I turn to clubs now and say, what's the benefit of joining Wako? What's the benefit of being part of this movement? Well, the benefit is the fact that our industry and our sport is moving in this direction, and we're doing, and nobody else is. No one else is going to be selected in the Olympic Games. It's not going to be the 101 alphabet soup organizations that exist that are all over the place now. I won't mention any names, but I find it ironic that our sport has all these quote unquote world bodies, and that's fine because I think the more chance kids have to compete, that's great. But I think it's important that people recognize that there's only one way of going down the Olympic pathway. It's a not-for-profit, amateur-based, IOC structured, development-focused way of getting athletes ready for in 8, 12 years to have athletes ready for the Olympic Games. And I know that's I look at the kids in my gym. That's why we have a really big junior program. Both myself and my coaches, Jamie, Ross, Brandon, Brian, we really put a lot of time to our kids because we look at the kids at our gym that are 4, 8, 12 years old, and the ones that show talent and interest. I keep thinking, you know what, in 8 years, Daniel or
Mm-hmm.
Dave or Harper is going to be ready and will be at the pivotal age and get to the Olympic Games. Now, I say that at the same time, I say to club owners and coaches, Sport Canada and Wako have this thing called an LTAD, the long-term athlete development model, and and it's like that 10,000 hour like process, and you got to start early. I mean, some of us like yourself, other people that have accomplished amazing things in the sport, and didn't start when they were 5, 10, 15 years
Mm-hmm.
old, and that's another cool thing about our sport. I mean, you
Yeah.
can't be an Olympic gymnast unless you started when you were 7 years old. It can't be
Mm-hmm.
done. It's not possible. But in kickboxing, it is, because kickboxing is that sport where no matter what age, you can actually enter the sport and still have a great career because there's physical prowess, there's mental prowess, there's punching and kicking. So you may not be flexible, but you could be really strong. You can make up for this, for that. It's an amazing sport. I played soccer, football, track, I boxed, I ran, I did a lot of sports. I fell in love with this one because I think when everything is said and done, there's an even playing field. And all it really depends is how much time, effort, and heart you're going to put into that particular sport, and anybody can do it. I fundamentally believe if somebody comes into my gym, if somebody gets on my national team, they can be a world champion, they can be an Olympian if they truly want to, but they've got to have that determination and grit to go along with the program that's given to them. And if they can do that, for sure, they can go to the Olympics. And so we will have, like in 8 years, kids that are coming from Newfoundland, that are coming from Burlington, that will represent Canada in the Olympic Games.
It's amazing. Speaking of women's boxing and how it's really come along, you got to meet Clarissa Shields. Tell me a little bit about Clarissa Shields and what that was like to meet her. I know your wife, Jamie, which is also a kickboxer from Newfoundland, one of my best friends. She was over the moon to meet Clarissa because she has done so much for women, and not just in boxing, but in all sports. You have people jumping up and down to see her fight because she's such an entertaining boxer and she's so skilled.
Absolutely. And you know what? Um, it's actually pretty amazing because two of the Olympic athletes that won medals at the very first Olympic Games for women, and then went on to win a second medal. So if you look at this, Clarissa Shields won 2 gold medals at 2 separate Olympic Games, which not even a lot of men have done. I mean, in itself to come back and win 2 Olympics. So we're talking 4 years and then another 4 years, and then you have Katie Taylor from Ireland, another one who won.
Mm-hmm.
It's a long time to prepare for the Olympic Games. So the two of them I think, are just fantastic boxers. So it was great meeting Clarissa. Like I have followed her career right from the Olympic Games. Um, I know she went through a lot of challenges around personal
Mm-hmm.
life. Flint, Michigan is where she's from. I spent a lot of time in Flint. I was involved with a few community organizations. I did some work there, and I used to go to Flint and Detroit all the time because Kronk's gym was there, and that was one of the gyms that I used to train out of during my amateur days when I first turned professional. And so it's a tough area of Detroit. It's a rural area. It's a very poor. It's a rural area. It's a very urban area, but it's very very poor.
Mm-hmm.
And first, it came up through a really harsh background. I believe there's a documentary on her. It's kind of hard to watch actually because I think for a lot of people when they look at Olympia and they look at somebody making money and they think, oh my god, and they realize, oh,
Mm-hmm.
she faced child abuse, she faced a lot of violence as a child, survived that and became an exceptional boxer, like just fantastic. Um, Sometimes I mean, she's still got some challenges, I think, because the environment that she's
Mm-hmm.
from, in that environment, that's not my position to make any judgments on people, but I know the couple
Mm-hmm.
of times I've gone down to actually watch her fight. Um, my personal feeling is she really needs to try to remove herself from some of the folks that are in that area. But again, that's just my particular position. I actually
Mm-hmm.
really love Katie Taylor because I think she represents a really strong moral fabric as well. I don't know if you know
Mm-hmm.
much about Katie, but
I
she
love Katie.
decided to remove herself from her father, who was, her lifetime coach, because she didn't think it was appropriate for him to leave her mother, and just that moral compass that she has, I think it's rare. I mean, it's rare, I think, in general for society. I think it's certainly rare in combative sports, unfortunately. I know for myself, the moral compass has always been such an important, integral part of my own training and my own fighting, and even the leadership work that I do now with Wako. You know, to me, there's right and there's wrong, and then there's gray areas. But I think as much as possible, the moral compass that we all should have as athletes, that we should all have as leaders in the sport, has to be grounded in beliefs that are beyond sport. And that's when I look at someone like Katie, I certainly see that. And I'm not putting anyone on pedestals. Like I learned the hard way when I was growing up in the fighting world, because I went to a lot of camps. I spent time in the Vinny Pazienza camp in Providence. I spent time in a lot of other professional camps. And I learned very early not to put athletes on pedestals because, frankly, most of them, were not morally grounded people. And I think that I personally have always thought of that as being important. And it's not someone is a good person or a bad person or something like that. It's just, what are your values and why do you do this? Why do you want to move things forward? But anyways, I think Clarissa is a phenomenal human. I really do. And I think she's, continue to grapple with some of the issues that all of us have, going through hard life challenges. But man, that girl sucks. Man, she can hit. The fight that we went and saw, she got dropped in the first round by she fought a girl that was the world champion in the weight class below her, and she just caught Clarissa with a beautiful shot, dropped her, and she came back and round after round after round, just beat her. And I always love that. I love that underdog. I'm a big fan of underdogs, and even though I think Clarissa Shields was the expected favorite, but to get dropped and come back is fantastic. Like there's another boxer that I follow that not too many people know about, but there's a boxer named Badu Jack out of Vegas. Same thing. Incredible person. If anyone wants to ever research a good human being to say to your kids, this would be a good role model, Badu Jack is one of them. Olympic medalist from Sweden, moved to the States. He's now I believe the WBC world champion. He's actually started a charity and refugee camps in the Middle East. And he goes on a periodic basis. He's actually donated some of his entire purse to working with these refugee kids. He's there 3-4 times a year. I know his manager, and sometimes he gets frustrated when Badu's in camp because he's supposed to be training, but he wants to be in Beirut working with these orphans, and that's his nature. And I think when you start to see people like that, so if I was to say something to you, Stephanie, this is my deepest moment here. When I coach athletes, I really don't have an interest in producing an Olympian. I don't have an interest in producing a world champion. I want to produce or be involved with the development of the next Muhammad Ali. And what I mean by that is somebody who will take sport and use it as a pedestal to make huge social movements in the world. I mean, people that followed Muhammad Ali, and he was a great boxer, don't get me wrong, but if you look at him now mechanically, you see lots of flaws and issues, and but he was an incredible, poet, an incredible politician, an incredible philanthropist, an incredible activist. And I think that is really why we should be doing this sport anyways. I mean, we really should be in the business of the world is not a great place. Certainly not a great place for a lot of the world. But there's so much more we can be doing. And I think sport is a platform to get there. But people that are world champions, people that have accomplished something in the world, have a much more powerful pedestal to make statements and to make change and influence change. And that's my dream. So whether it's creating the next Muhammad Ali or Mother Teresa or Martin Luther King, or any of those types of personas that can make massive change, that is my goal as a coach.
I hear what you're saying, and that's a great message. Let's have more champions that children can emulate that have strong moral backgrounds. Let's influence the next little boxers that are coming up to be people who make great social change. That's an amazing point, Maz.
Yeah.
Definitely. Whew, I'm like, where do I even go from there? It's just so good. Let's talk about your most memorable fight that you have either coached or your most memorable fight that you fought yourself.
Oh boy. I can give you a ton of examples of fights that I've coached. Not so much fights that I've had, but there's one in particular. It's funny, and I'm only saying this now because I was watching it yesterday. Because I was working with one of my pro athletes, Adam Masenza, has got a pro MMA fight coming up in a couple weeks, and so we just finished designing his training or fight strategy. We already designed his training camp a few weeks back, and so I fought a gentleman by the name of Anthony Bartonelli. I was fighting for his world title, and it was neat because he had a 98% knockout rate. He basically knocked everybody out, and he was getting to the point where his pro was picking up. He had fought on a couple of Manny Pacquiao cards, and he was now shifting towards pro boxing versus pro kickboxing. But he was a world champion in the the light middleweight division. I was world champion in the middleweight division. And so I'd already defended my title. I think I'd won 3 titles at that point. So I wanted to fight someone really good. And I remember throwing the name around in my management circle. And a good advisor of mine called me out from Chicago and said, listen, Maz, I want to tell you something. You know what? You're a great person. You know, you've got a great career. This is not a fight that's good for you. And I asked him why. And he said, well, because Anthony's 29. He's got a 98% lockout rate. You're 40. And you're getting to be a little bit slow. And of course, my ego was quite hurt by that moment. I'd like to think I wasn't slow, but you know, the reality was I was probably getting slower. And absolutely, I called his manager up and offered him a great purse and said, look, we're going to do the fight. We'll do it in Burlington. And so, you know, we had to jump through a bunch of hoops with the Ontario Athletic Commission to get it sanctioned here. I'd already sanctioned one professional event at home. Most of my fights, like 99% of my fights, have been overseas, Europe, Asia, Africa. But I was really near the end of my career, and I wanted to actually try and do some fights at home. And so that was the fight that I took. He definitely hit hard, but we had a really good game plan, and it went 12 rounds. And he did one of the things that I have so much respect for an athlete. I dropped him in round 4. I don't know how the hell he got back up again, but he did, and he came back and he rallied. He won the last round, which for me is always amazing, because when I say to fighters, if you could win the 12th round of an all-round fight, you know what, I'd give you the fight. In this case, I'm glad they didn't, because that would have meant that. But for sure, he won the last round. But I won by unanimous decision. I guess I love the fight because I was 41 and he was 29. He was the favorite. He was taller than me, bigger than me, and I just wanted to. And I was honestly, I was scared. I was scared shitless. Like I was totally nervous about that. And that was why I said yes. That's the guy I want to fight. And I was thinking about retiring around that time. I thought, let me just do him. That'll be the perfect fight for me. And we set it up. It won. It was still, a relatively, it was a unanimous decision, but it was a close fight, I think, anyways. And I think I probably enjoyed it the most because it was probably the hardest test for me. He hit super hard. I had a severe concussion after the fight was over. But it was just one of those fights where I wanted to fight someone that I knew that was better. I wanted to fight someone that already had a title. And that meant more to me. Whether I won his title or not wasn't as important as knowing that I had to fight him because I was scared. And that was, why that made the most, that's why it was the most favorite fight for me too. Coaching, oh my God, that's a hard one because I've had so many exceptionally good athletes over the years. Right now, one of the athletes I'm working with is from your hometown, Brandon Lehman, and I've thoroughly loved enjoying watching him fight and coaching him. And you know what, he's had a number of exceptionally good fights with us here in Burlington and with the system that we have. But I think what probably impresses me the most about him is the fact that he now understands that becoming an exceptional athlete is secondary to becoming an exceptional human. And so watching him grow as a young man,
Mhm.
watching him focusing on maybe some areas that he needs personal development in, like that stuff, I think is amazing because the sport will then just naturally come because once you say, I need to get better at this, I need to get better at that, I need to become more patient, more focused, more mindful, focus on my thoughts, focusing on my feelings, try and get all straightened out, look at my schedule, my routines. That translates and doing that just because that's the most important thing to do, then translates into the way you fight. So he fought for the Canadian Prestige title up in the very first show that we sanctioned in Yellowknife, and he beat one of the athletes on our national team. Exceptionally good boxer, MMA champion, boxing champion, and he stopped him, I believe, in the third or fourth round, by just a complete, well orchestrated, structured strategy. It was a beautiful fight to watch. If you ever go on YouTube, you can do a search for Brandon Lehman and Gray Pacino. Gray's a great athlete, wonderful young man. I have the most utmost respect for him. So it was a great fight to watch two great people perform. But then for me, watching a young man completely, use every skill in the book to orchestrate a win was actually amazing to watch.
I agree. Brandon has grown so much.
And by the
So
way,
much.
my next favorite fight is Jamie Collins, exceptionally good fighter. You should watch YouTube first. She's probably my favorite athlete by far.
Note how you stole both of these athletes from Newfoundland. Two
Yeah,
of my favorite people. So you're good at scouting talent.
I am.
Maz, let all the viewers out there and listeners out there know how they can catch you.
Well, I'm not really sure how to catch me. I usually try not to be caught, but if you have me, you can. I've got a Facebook something. I'm not sure what it is. I'm really not into social media, but you can find me on Muzammal Newaz on Facebook. I think it's Instagram. I'm not entirely sure. But if you ever go on the Wako Canada Facebook page or Instagram account, you can always see me doing something. I guess I'll have to figure this how to find me better with a name, or I don't know what you guys call it, but I'm around.
Thank you so much for being on today. This show can also be heard on the Spanglish Radio Network. The H.E.R Network is part of the Spanglish World Media Network. Please check us out at SpanishWorld.ca for all the news and programming. Spanglish World. Watch it, hear it, read it, download it, live it. Thanks so much.